Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jacob.
And Jacob continues to substitute for Stephanie. She's not with us, but she'll be back shortly. And today we're going to talk about a detective story involving none other than Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes is probably the most famous detective, I would say, in literature.
Indeed.
Tom, do you like Sherlock Holmes? Do you read a lot of his stories, or did you see any of the movies, the Sherlock Holmes movies that came out?
I think I've seen like cartoons when I was a kid, but I've never actually gone to read the books and the stories. There are quite a few of them actually, and they are available on the internet for free download. So I guess I don't have an excuse for not reading them, but I have to rely on summaries for the most part, and that's what we have for you today. A summary of a story, detective story involving Sherlock Holmes. But this one is a story that happens around Christmas time, which is appropriate because Christmas is coming.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everyone out there. It's coming very soon, so hopefully you're getting in the Christmas spirit. So what do you say? Shall we jump in and read the article?
Let's do it. Let's now listen to the entire contents of our article read one time.
It's Christmas time in Victorian London. There is a frost on the streets, and the city is filled with festive goodwill. Dr. John Watson visits his friend Sherlock Holmes, the legendary consulting detective, at 221B Baker Street. Holmes is investigating what seems to be a trivial affair. A messenger has brought him a hat and a Christmas goose that appear to have been lost by a man called Henry Baker. Holmes uses the hat's features as evidence to deduce the personal traits and domestic habits of Mr. Baker. However, the matter is more serious than Holmes first perceived. Inside the goose is the blue carbuncle, a priceless jewel recently stolen from a noble's hotel room. The police have arrested John Horner, a plumber with a previous criminal theft conviction for the crime. The hotel manager, James Ryder, let Horner into the room for a job. But when he returned later, Ryder found both Horner and the blue carbuncle gone. Horner continues to protest his innocence. The police are under a lot of pressure to solve the mystery, while Horner's family is facing a terrible Christmas. Holmes now begins his investigation by placing an advertisement in the evening newspapers, asking for Mr. Baker to come to Baker Street and collect his hat and goose. Mr. Baker arrives, and Holmes questions him. But it's clear to Holmes that Mr. Baker has no knowledge of the crime. However, Holmes is able to learn where Mr. Baker obtained the goose. He and Watson put on their thickest coats and venture out onto the chilly streets of London.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's dig right in and talk about the contents of today's lesson, one sentence at a time. Again, it's our literature unit for the month of December, and the story is all about Sherlock Holmes. It's entitled The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, a Sherlock Holmes Christmas Mystery. Now, we did have to look up the word carbuncle before the program because this is not a word you see very often. In this particular case, it's referring to a kind of jewel, right?
Right. So a jewel is a very precious stone. Maybe you could think of a jewel being like a diamond or a ruby or something like that. It might be something you'd wear as a necklace or a piece of jewelry, right?
Indeed, and this is not very common, so yes, we did have to look this word up before our lesson for today. It also could refer to some kind of growth on your skin or an abscess or a boil on the skin, but of course we don't want people to suffer from that, so we're not going to talk about that too much, but for the purpose of our story here, the blue carbuncle is a kind of jewel. Okay, now here in the first paragraph it says, it's Christmas time in Victorian London. If it's Victorian London, of course, we're referring to the period of time when Queen Victoria was in power in England.
Right, and so that was in the 19th century, probably around the time of the Industrial Revolution.
Sure.
And so it's Christmas time, which is always very nice. So when it's Christmas, it is colder, there is frost on the streets, and the city is filled with festive goodwill. Okay, so frost is when London is very rainy, of course, and it's a wet city a lot of the time. And so if there's frost, it means that the water has frozen a little bit. So it's cold, and it's a little bit, snowy, wintry, you might say. But the city is filled with festive goodwill. Now, goodwill, of course, is kind of a kind, friendly, helpful feeling that you might have around the holidays. So if you're feeling good, if you feel like you want to help people, you're just feeling friendly, that means you are full of goodwill.
And there's festive goodwill. So festive just means there's a holiday atmosphere. People are happy. They're chatting with each other. There are parties going on. And Dr. John Watson visits his friend Sherlock Holmes, the legendary consulting detective, at 221B Baker Street. So, of course, we've got John Watson, and then he goes to visit his friend Sherlock Holmes. Who is Sherlock Holmes? Well, he's a detective. In fact, he's a legendary consulting detective. And consulting means people go to consult with him. They ask him for his advice or they get information from him. You might know somebody who works as a consultant for a certain company. They give people advice and information. And, of course, a detective is somebody who wants to solve a crime by looking at the clues.
Right, so you might think of a police detective, perhaps. There's a lot of shows on TV, the police dramas, and you have the guys in the blue uniforms that go and walk out on the street. Those are just cops, but detectives are the ones who, they don't wear the police uniform, but they're the ones who are kind of in charge. They go to a crime scene and kind of look around and try to find clues. Those are the detectives. Okay, Holmes is investigating what seems to be a trivial affair. Okay, so it's something that's trivial here. It's something that's not very important. Okay, if something is very major, like a really big deal, you wouldn't call it trivial. Something that's trivial is, rather small or minor. So this is just a trivial affair that Holmes is working on.
Yeah, it's not too important. It doesn't really involve anything serious. Nobody was murdered. There's no serial killer or anybody like that. And here's the actual mystery here. A messenger has brought him a hat and a Christmas goose that appear to have been lost by a man called Henry Baker. So, of course, a messenger, somebody who brings information to Sherlock Holmes, has brought Sherlock Holmes a hat and then also a Christmas goose. And it appears they have been lost by a man called Henry Baker. So, yes, indeed, this messenger brings the goose and the hat and says, hey, it looks like these two items that I'm bringing you were actually lost by someone by the name of Mr. Baker.
Right, so, okay, do we have a mystery, though? I don't really see the mystery. We know what the things are and we know who they belong to, so what are we doing here? Holmes uses the hat's features as evidence to deduce the personal traits and domestic habits of Mr. Baker. Okay, so this is what Holmes does. He takes a look at kind of common items or ordinary items, and he deduces, he figures out things about the person who owns the items just based on them. So he's looking at them, he's kind of hunting or looking for clues, and then he's able to figure out things about Mr. Baker just based on this goose and this hat.
Exactly. So I met somebody the other day who was wearing a black t-shirt with Megadeth written on the front.
Cool.
And she had her fingernails painted black and she had chrome earrings and her lips were painted black as well. So I could deduce from her appearance that she's a fan of heavy metal music. Okay, so yes, indeed, you kind of do that when you're a detective. You look at the clues and then you come up with some conclusions. You deduce something from what you have there. And in this particular case, Holmes was able to deduce or figure out the personal traits and also the domestic habits of Mr. Baker. He could tell basically the personality of Mr. Baker and what he did at home.
However, the matter is more serious than Holmes first perceived. Okay, so we thought it was a trivial matter, but now we're getting to the real story. The matter is more serious. Inside the goose is the blue carbuncle. Okay, so we have a goose, and inside the goose we have this jewel, this blue carbuncle, a priceless jewel recently stolen from a noble's hotel room. Okay, so a noble is someone who is sort of higher up in society. You might say they're very rich. They come from an important family. Okay, so they are a noble, and a noble will have a lot of money. And so one thing that he or she might have will be priceless jewels, very expensive or important jewels that are worth a lot, and this jewel had been stolen from this noble's hotel room.
Yeah, but jewel is a precious stone. You listed some earlier, like emeralds and sapphires and rubies and things like that. Those are jewels. And, of course, diamonds are often quite expensive, and there are some other types of jewels that are even more rare and precious. But what I'm having trouble with here is how Sherlock Holmes was able to figure out that there was this jewel inside the goose. Did he, like, stick his hand down the goose's throat or something like that?
Felt his stomach area or her stomach area,
kind of grope around and feel it. Oh, there's a jewel in there. Or maybe they were preparing it for Christmas dinner, and when they cut it open, they discovered the jewel inside. But in any case, that's what happened here. Holmes did find this jewel inside the goose, and of course, I guess it was in the news because the precious jewel was recently stolen from a noble's hotel room, which could be a duke or an earl or somebody like that.
That's right. Okay, well, that brings us to a good place to take a break. It's the midpoint of our lesson. So let's listen to our Chinese teacher, and we'll see you back here very soon.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是12月份 Unit4 The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle A Sherlock Holmes Christmas Mystery 第一天的课程。好，我们先看前两句，就交代了故事的时空背景。It's Christmas time in Victorian London。好，所以呢，这个时候场景是圣诞节、圣诞佳节的时候。那地点在哪里呢？就是在伦敦。时代背景是维多利亚时代。接着请看句子结构比较复杂的第5句。A messenger has brought him a hat and a Christmas goose that appeared to have been lost by a man called Henry Baker。好，首先请同学看到 appear to 这个动词片语。其实呢，它就等于 seem to， 是什么意思呢？就是似乎是。好，那接着我们看到下面说 They were lost by a man called Henry Baker。 那其实这样子的句子是属于100%肯定，但如果只是有一些线索，根据这些线索推断，这些东西好像是 Henry Baker 的物品，我们可以运用 appear to 这个片语。不过同学请注意到，那由于原本的句子是过去式 They were lost by a man called Henry Baker， 那所以我们如果要用 appear to 来表达，我们其实是推断的。我们可以说 They appear to have been lost by Henry Baker。 请注意到这边呢，我们后面 to 后面是用 have 再加 pp， 所以呢，这就是表示对过去的根据过一些线索来推断过去。好，那老师再给大家一个例子，比方说 This idea was stolen from my company。 那这是100%的肯定的控诉。可是如果我们只是猜测，根据一些线索猜测，我们会说 This idea seems to have been stolen from my company. This idea appears to have been stolen from my company.
We're going to take a short break now, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Again, we're talking about Sherlock Holmes' short story. Of course, this story was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and it was published a long time ago. So because it was published so long ago, you can probably find a copy of this story on the internet somewhere for free if you want to read it yourself. So far in our story, it's Christmas time in London, and of course, Dr. John Watson goes to visit Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock is working on a case. Somebody brought him a hat and a goose, and he's trying to figure out why he has these things. It turns out that the goose has a precious stone inside it. It has a precious jewel that was recently stolen from a noble's hotel room. So I guess now he's got to figure out who stole this jewel.
Right. So let's jump right back in. The police have arrested John Horner. a plumber with a previous criminal theft conviction for the crime. Okay, so what do you do when you want to solve a crime? Well, you look for people who may have committed the crime, and the police have identified John Horner. He's a plumber. A plumber, of course, is someone who would come to your place to, fix your kitchen sink if it was stopped up, or, your toilet if it was broken. They might fix your toilet. They deal with pipes and water a lot of the time. These are plumbers. And this plumber, John Horner, well, he has a criminal theft conviction. Okay, theft, of course, is the act or crime of stealing something. Okay, so if we read about a theft in the newspaper or we see it on the news, someone stole something, perhaps from a store or, a bank theft from a bank. You might steal money. That would be theft as well. Or if you steal something from someone, okay, that's theft. And a conviction, that's when you're arrested and you go to court and the judge or the jury finds you guilty of the crime. This is a conviction. They convict you of a crime, and usually after that, you will be sent to jail if you have received a conviction for something, for a crime. So, do we have our man? Is John Horner the one who stole the blue carbuncle?
Probably not, because then that means the story's over already, so it would be an awfully short story if they found their man so quickly. But, of course, we'll find out what happens later on as we continue with our summary. Again, he's a plumber. He works on pipes, but he does have a criminal record, okay? That's one of the things they check first. Well, does this suspect have a record of committing crimes? Because if he doesn't, then it's probably unlikely that this person is the criminal. But he does have a previous record. He did steal something before, and he was convicted for that. He was found guilty and had to go to prison or pay a fine or something like that. And the hotel manager, James Ryder, let Horner into the room for a job. So, indeed, we're going back to the hotel where the jewel was stolen. The manager had let the person into the room. He had let Mr. Horner into the room, and the plumber, Mr. Horner, was going to work on the pipes there, probably in the bathroom or something like that. And James Ryder, of course, is the manager of the hotel. But when he returned later, when Mr. Ryder, the manager, returned later, he found both Horner and the blue carbuncle gone. So, yeah, that makes it look like Mr. Horner is guilty because Mr. Horner is not there anymore, and neither is the missing jewel.
Right, but who leaves a very precious jewel like in their hotel room? Just there, it might be on the, on the bed or something. And oh, look, there's a very expensive jewel here. Come and get it. It doesn't seem like a very smart thing to do. But let's continue. Horner continues to protest his innocence. Okay, if you protest your innocence, it kind of means you plead your case. You say, I didn't do it. I'm not guilty. I'm innocent of this that you're accusing me. I didn't do it. So yeah, when you protest something, you kind of argue it. You try to argue your point. So he's protesting his innocence. The police are under a lot of pressure to solve the mystery, of course, right? If there's something that happens, the police will feel pressure to solve the mystery, while Horner's family is facing a terrible Christmas. Right, he might have kids or a wife, and they're all saying, what happened to Daddy? Oh, Daddy got arrested because they think he stole this thing. Oh, but Daddy didn't steal it. Well, there's nothing we can do. The police think he did. So, right, this could create a very kind of tense atmosphere, especially around the holidays, around Christmas.
Yep, you don't want a family member going to jail during Christmas. That would ruin your Christmas. Who's going to be there to open the presents and stuff like that? So, of course, also, we have the noble who lost the jewel. So that means this person is important, and therefore the police are under a lot of pressure to solve this crime. You got to solve this mystery because, hey, it involves a noble there, an earl or a prince or a duke or whatever. So yes, indeed, we've got to solve this mystery. But again, Mr. Horner's family will be kind of sad if their daddy has to go to prison for stealing a jewel or something like that. So now Holmes needs to begin his investigation, and Holmes begins his investigation by placing an advertisement in the evening newspapers asking for Mr. Baker to come to Baker Street and collect his hat and goose. So that's how he tries to get the information he needs to solve the crime. He begins begins his investigation by placing an advertisement in the newspapers. Now, here we've got the word investigation. That's the process of gathering information in order to solve a crime or to answer a question.
That's right. Okay, so it's interesting because we have the name Mr. Baker, and remember, we think that the goose and the hat belong to him, so he might be a suspect in this case. And Holmes wants to invite Mr. Baker to where? Well, he lives on Baker Street. Okay, so there's a lot of Bakers in this paragraph here. Mr. Baker arrives and Holmes questions him, but it's clear to Holmes that Mr. Baker has no knowledge of the crime. Okay, so remember that Sherlock Holmes is a detective, so he's a great detective, so very quickly he can find out if you know something about a case, and he very quickly deduces or understands or thinks that Mr. Baker here doesn't know who stole the blue carbuncle. He has no knowledge of the crime.
Right, so I guess Mr. Baker was the owner of the goose and of the hat. He's not the Earl, okay? He's another guy. And, of course, he has no knowledge that the goose had a jewel inside of it. He's totally innocent. At least that's what Holmes deduces here as a result of his questioning. And he, of course, is conducting this investigation. And remember, if you're conducting an investigation, you are investigating a crime. So, yes, indeed, you're gathering information. And yes, Holmes questions him. And if you read the story, you'll probably see the actual conversation that they had. But of course, in today's program, we're just summarizing what happened. So again, Mr. Baker has no knowledge of the crime. However, Holmes is able to learn where Mr. Baker obtained the goose. So I guess he figured out where Mr. Baker got the goose simply by asking him, "Hey, where did you buy the goose?" "Well, I bought it at this particular place."
Right. Okay, that's a good way to find out information. You just have to ask. He and Watson, Holmes and Watson, put on their thickest coats. Remember, it's nearing Christmas time, so London is chilly. It's cold outside. They put on their thickest coats and venture out onto the chilly streets of London. Okay, when you venture out somewhere, you leave one place for another. Okay, so they're venturing out. They're leaving 221B Baker Street and going out onto the chilly streets of London. Where are they going to go? Well, you'll have to wait and find out next time.
You will, but first of all, we're going to talk about this word venture here. And remember, this word venture is being used as a verb, and that just means they simply go out into an area. And venture usually means it involves maybe a certain amount of danger, or maybe it's a kind of adventure or a journey or something like that. So they go out onto the chilly streets of London. Venture can also be a noun, like a business venture, which is like a business enterprise or a business project that you might work together with somebody else, a business venture. And I also have to mention that this, of course, was a popular instrumental music group from the 1960s, The Ventures. Maybe you remember the song Walk, Don't Run, you know. Na, 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 na. Maybe you're a fan of The Ventures. I don't know. I have some friends here who like The Ventures.
Okay, they're probably on YouTube if you want to look them up, right?
Right, but it's kind of off the subject a bit, but the point is Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are putting on their thickest coats because, remember, it's December in London. It's pretty cold there. The streets are frosty and things like that, and they venture out onto the chilly streets of London, continuing with their investigation, and we'll continue to follow their investigation in our next program. Please join us then, but right now we're going to finish our lesson for today by listening once again to our Chinese teacher.
在这篇故事，福尔摩斯调查的是蓝宝石窃案。课文第二段交代了嫌疑犯是一位有窃盗前科的水电工，而后福尔摩斯开始着手调查。现在我们一起看看第二三段的学习重点。好，请同学特别注意到第二段的这一句话 ：The police have arrested John Horner， 一直到 for the crime 这边，请同学注意哦。这里两个逗点中间是 John Horner 的同位语，补充说明他的身份，他是一位水电工。而 conviction 是定罪的意思 ，theft 是窃盗罪，所以说他之前触犯窃盗罪而遭到定罪。这个字的词类变化包括动词的过去分词 convicted。Somebody is convicted of something， 这表示呢某人被判了什么罪名。 比方说 The plumber was convicted of theft. The plumber was convicted of theft. 另外，请同学注意名词 convict， 重音放在第一音节 convict 是受刑人的意思。那我们还有一个词语搭配是 an escaped convict. An escaped convict 是逃犯的意思。好，请同学呢继续看到下一句 The hotel manager James Ryder 这个句子，一直到 gone 这边。好，请同学特别注意到 Ryder found both Horner and the blue carbuncle gone. 好 find 这个字哦，它其实后面加了受词 both Horner and the blue carbuncle 蓝宝石，后面的这个 gone 其实是受词补语，表示呢这个人还有这个蓝宝石都消失不见了。接下来请看下一句 Horner continues to protest his innocence. Protest his innocence 意思就是他极力主张自己的清白。那再请同学呢看到下面一段的第一句 Holmes now 这个 Holmes 指的当然是福尔摩斯 Holmes now begins his investigation by placing 好一直到最后面的 his hat and goose。 这里请同学注意这是一个分词构句，稍微复杂一点。那同样的 asking 它在意思上的主词到底是谁做了这项要求呢？一样是福尔摩斯。那也请同学看清楚哦，这里的 and collect 这个 and 它并不是在连接 asking 的，它所连接的是 come to Baker Street 还有后面的 collect his hat and goose。 那所以我们了解到这一句话的意思是说，福尔摩斯呢请Baker 先生做两件事，第一就是到 Baker Street， 第二件事呢就是认领帽子还有鹅。再来我们看到第二个句子 Mr. Baker arrives at Holmes， 好，这里一直看到最后面的 has no knowledge of the crime， 请同学把 has no knowledge of the crime 画起来，这个句型呢其实是等于 Mr. Baker knows nothing about the crime。 Mr. Baker knows nothing about the crime。 最后请同学看到这个句子 however 的这个句子中间是不是有一个动词 obtained？ Mr. Baker obtained the goose， 请同学把 obtain 画起来。在第二天的课文里面我们会看到另外一个词是 acquire， 它们都是得到的意思，这两个字呢是同义词，它跟 acquire 是同义词，请注意。以上就是我们第一天的中文讲解，谢谢大家。
That's all for today, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and make sure you join us again next time as we continue to talk about the adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, a Sherlock Holmes Christmas mystery. Until then, I'm Tom.
And I'm Jacob.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.